love to sort of get your take and jump into these sort of big, meaty issues right away. Maybe starting with COVID-19. Tell me, what did your team do in response? I know Pennsylvania gets a lot of credit for having a very active, sort of leaning in approach to it. So I'd love to hear about what you and your team did, maybe in the early days of COVID, and sort of what the lessons you learned from it are.
Sure. I'm grateful that we didn't have these major crises hit on day one of the administration, right? We had some time to work out operationally, some pretty significant operational improvements that I think we benefited from by the time COVID did hit. DGS serves as a support agency for crisis response in Pennsylvania. Governor Wolf and the entire cabinet responded very, very quickly, declaring a state of emergency early on in the process, getting all of the agencies together. Our job has been primarily to, provide support to the Department of Health and to the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency to make sure that we could deliver what was necessary in order to make sure that we didn't have hospitals that were overrun and short of personal protective equipment. Our role has been similar to state procurement operations all over the country. I'm incredibly proud of the work that folks have done. We turned on a dime and figured out how to telework very quickly, which is a story in and of itself. And we also, had to get to work very quickly trying to supplement our current sources of supply for things like N95 masks and gowns and face shields and all of the things that we've all been actively trying to procure. When it was clear that our traditional supply chains were not going to be able to deliver, we had to learn very quickly how to work with third parties who could help us go directly to China and other places in order to source those materials. Happily, we were able to stay ahead of the demand here in Pennsylvania. That has a lot to do with the work that the larger administration did to flatten the curve and to make sure that we didn't have, major outbreaks in Pennsylvania so far. We have, managed for the most part to avoid shortages of PPE across the state, and that's in large part due to the big effort that our procurement team has put into it. The other part of it that we've been involved in has been logistics. So when shipments of PPE have come in from the federal government, we have a supplies and surplus operations bureau that handles warehousing and logistics. And we stood up very quickly an operation that was taking all of the inbound personal protective equipment and other things that agencies and local governments were saying they were needing, pulled it all into a warehouse that we stood up within about 48 hours. That operation has been running around the clock ever since. It comes in, we figure out what it is, and we ship it out.
I know, Curt, in your first tour of duty in Pennsylvania, and I know this because I was lucky to work alongside you, that this idea of sort of getting a lot of inventory and keeping it ourselves in our own warehouses and distributing ourselves was probably the furthest away from the strategy at the time. We were really moving towards less inventory and just-in-time delivery. What do you think the sort of long-term implications for procurement and supply chain are from COVID? Do you think we stay in this sort of let's own and control our inventory, or do we go back to sort of a just-in-time approach, or is there something in the middle?
I think it depends on the types of goods that we're talking about. We are, like many states right now, looking to stockpile as much of this equipment and these supplies as we can, anticipating that the second wave or the continuation of the first wave, whatever it is, we're anticipating that it may well come back to Pennsylvania. And so we are presently looking to stockpile as much of this equipment as we can. I do think that as the market and our traditional supply chain catches up, there's going to be more of these materials available and at a reasonable price. So it would make sense for us. It would make sense for us to continue to stockpile it over time. I think, one of the things I think that this whole crisis has underscored for us is that, we need our government to have capacity. We need to be able to respond when there are significant challenges. We need some redundancy because we can't always count on the federal government to deliver when we needed to.
As we saw, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. So I wonder, isn't it how you talk about sort of category specific, right? So maybe a category like office supplies, you can still stay in a JIT relationship, but when it's things that are literally the difference between life and death, those things you keep a little closer.
I think it's a really great question, David. I think it is going to change our perspective on how we look at inventory. We've had a tendency over the last 10, 15 years to try to adopt a mindset that inventory equals cost. And I think we have to shift to a mindset that in some cases inventory equals cost, but it also equals capacity.
And protection.
Pardon?
And protection.
And protection, yeah. And so I think we're going to need to incorporate that learning into our sourcing strategies here as we go forward. I don't think we're ever going to move back to a world where we're warehousing office supplies on our own. But for things like N95 masks, I think one of the lessons here is that it probably makes sense for us to have a significant number of those things on hand.
It's fascinating. It'll be fascinating to look, a year or 5 years in the future and see where things shake out.
Yeah.
So I think another part of the impact of coronavirus is clearly on what's happening in the economy. 48 million Americans filing for unemployment. A certain recession that's on its way. I know from the Great Recession that there was a fairly significant procurement impact to the fact that governments were desperate to find ways to save money, but also had to find ways to jumpstart the economy. Tell me what you think about sort of how government responds, and particularly how procurement responds to the economic pressures that the coronavirus is creating.
Well, I think that the good thing is that, or I guess I would say, this is something we know we're good at, right? When we took office, when the Wolf administration took office 6 years ago, we were facing about a $2 billion budget deficit at that time. And we engaged very, very quickly in an effort to reinvigorate strategic sourcing in the Commonwealth, to take a really hard look at, not just where we could reduce costs on current contracts, but really look at, where were the goods and services that we were buying that maybe we didn't need to buy. So we, have pulled, more than $1 billion out of the state's operating costs over the last 6 years. And we've done it, pretty consistently. And we started out in response to a big budget crunch. The one we're facing, no doubt, is bigger. And there's a lot of uncertainty right now that attends to this whole conversation, right? We have a 5-month budget in place passed by the General Assembly, and we don't know yet what level of support we're going to see from the federal government, or what the size of the ultimate cost reduction is going to look like when we face it this fall. But I think the thing that I tell my team over and over again is that we as an agency are essential to meeting this challenge.
Yeah.
5 years ago, we revamped the agency's mission statement and tried to get clarity around why we exist and what we do. And it really boils down to three things, right? We exist to make our government more efficient, more effective, and more safe. And to the extent that we do our job well, and to the extent that we continually compare what we're doing and what we're delivering against, efficiency, effectiveness, and safety, then we're contributing. I think the work we do is essential to the work that our other agencies do directly with folks who are in need. A good example is we saw unemployment benefits or applications for unemployment benefits in Pennsylvania skyrocket here a couple months ago in the same fashion that they have in most other states. It quadrupled or quintupled within a week, the number of inbound applications. So we had to get engaged with our Department of Labor and Industry very quickly. We provided staffing, we provided emergency contracts for call center support, and we've helped them be more responsive to the huge influx of demand. And these are the things that we try to be positioned to do as an agency all the time. And like I said, I think we're essential to that challenge. I don't know yet what the size of the cost reduction needs to be. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I think we'll do everything we can. I am worried about, I don't know that we're going to be able to get everything we need in order to keep the operation right side up. I don't think we'll get everything we need from cost savings.
Yeah.
I don't see it. We're already operating very lean.
Yeah, you've already taken $1 billion out. There's no fat left.
Yeah, well,
not much fat left, probably, right?
I'll never say that. I think there's always room for improvement.
Yeah.
But I don't think that. So, for example, we COVID and telework has helped us understand that maybe we don't need to occupy as much lease space across the Commonwealth as we need to.
Yeah.
Or as we do today.
Yep.
And there's absolutely a long-term opportunity to reduce the Commonwealth's costs when it comes to real estate going forward. But it's just not possible for us to capture those savings, inside of a year or 2 years, because we tend to sign long-term leases.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to do something that's really transformative, and this could be the catalyst, but you're not going to see the benefit fast enough given the economic crisis.
I think a lot of what we've done, David, is we've really tried to position the agency as capable of delivering value for our customers.
Yeah.
As I sit here today, right, our agency customers are a lot more likely, I think, to come to us early when they have a challenge, and to work with us to help figure out how we meet the challenge.
Yeah.
That's really what I think every back office, procurement, contracting, facilities, fill in the blank, really, that's what we should all aspire to be. We should be a source of value for the customers we serve. So I think we're going to be essential in whatever effort is necessary in order to keep things right side up here. We're doing it already.
It's interesting. You talked at the beginning about how you were able to put a lot of the sort of infrastructure in place over 5 years before all these things started happening. And I'm guessing a big part of the benefit of that was just building up credibility and trust among your peers and the agencies that you serve, so they knew they could depend on you rather than being thrown into this sort of in the first 30, 60 days.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that, and this is a credit to the governor. I think that we enjoy an incredibly collaborative cabinet here in Pennsylvania, and that hasn't always been true, but it's certainly true now. And I think that helps us a great deal. You know. Historically, agencies might have operated relatively independently of each other, and have may have tended to try to guard their turf, as it were.
Yeah.
I think in this administration, we've really done a great job of working together to help solve problems.